If you live in a city, well, you're basically right in the thick of this huge global ecological experiment. We're talking about urban biological invasions today.
Yeah, it's massive. Our cities, with all the trade and travel, they become these giant hubs for species that, well, originally don't belong there. It's a real feature of the Anthropocene.
Definitely defines our era. So for this deep dive, we're looking at a really significant paper.
Exactly. It's a big global synthesis led by Luke J. Potgieter and a large international team called Cities Shape the Diversity and Spread of Non-Native Species.
Okay.
And their goal was pretty clear: to figure out how cities, with their unique characteristics, actually drive these non-native species introductions and their spread across the world.
And this isn't just some academic curiosity. The stakes are incredibly high.
Oh, absolutely. Every container ship, every plane journey, it's potentially moving organisms around.
So cities become these landing spots, these foci, and that can cause real problems for native plants and animals, even for us, for human health.
For sure. Infrastructure, too. So the study tries to make sense of this complexity. They look at it through four main lenses, or axes, as they call them.
Four axes, okay. What are the...
Right. So first is A, connectivity. Then B, the physical properties of the city itself. C, culture and socioeconomics play a big role. And finally, D, biogeography and climate, the sort of traditional ecological factors.
And the big question threading through all this.
The core question is really profound. How much have these human-driven aspects of city life actually overridden the natural ecological and evolutionary rules that used to determine where species lived?
Ah, okay. So are cities rewriting the rules of ecology on a global scale? That's what we're tracking.
Pretty much. Urban environments are just different. They're disturbed, hyper-connected, kind of novel ecosystems.
Almost like they're designed for invasions in some ways.
You could argue that, yeah. So let's start with axis one, connectivity. This is about movement, right? Among cities, into a city, and then within a city itself.
3 levels, okay.
And the finding for connectivity among cities is maybe the most, well, eye-opening on a global scale. It's homogenization.
Homogenization. You mean cities everywhere are starting to look the same, biologically, because of these non-native species.
That's exactly it. Trade, travel. They're making the non-native species found in different cities more and more similar, especially if the cities are close together or have strong transport links.
Wow. Any specific examples jump out?
Yeah, they mentioned things like the plants found in urban forests across 38 global cities. The closer the cities were, just straight line distance on a map, the more similar their non-native plants were.
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. But you said there was something surprising.
Yes. This really shows the power of human activity. They looked at 11 cities in China's Yangtze River region, and they found the non-native species in those cities were more similar to each other than the native species were.
Get out.
Yeah. It tells you that our transport networks, ships, roads, rail, are basically punching holes through natural barriers. Cities are becoming biologically more like each other than like their own surrounding natural areas.
That's quite a thought. Okay, what about the second level of connectivity? The hub effect for a specific city.
Right, so this is about how connected a single city is to the rest of the world. Bigger cities, more connections coming in. They tend to act like depots for non-native species.
More arrivals, basically.
Exactly. More arrivals mean greater non-native species richness. Think about the Great Lakes cities there, with more ship traffic, bigger marinas. They had more non-native aquatic species.
Makes sense, like opening more doors.
Precisely. Or the Port of Savannah in Georgia, they found something like 13 non-native ant species right next to the port. It's acting like a clear entry point, setting them up for expansion.
Okay, so they arrive via these hubs. Then what about moving within the city? The internal connectivity, roads, parks, rivers?
Generally, yeah, those corridors help things spread once they're in. Roads, greenways, canals, they act like conduits.
But it's not always straightforward.
No, and there's a great example of that complexity. In Boise, Idaho, they studied puncture vine, an invasive plant. They actually found a negative relationship in some areas. More connectivity meant less puncture vine.
Wait, how does that work?
Because the really well-connected areas were also the more affluent neighborhoods. And in those places, people had manicured lawns, less bare ground.
Ah, and the puncture vine needs that bare ground to get started.
Exactly. So the human behavior tied to wealth landscaping choices overrode the physical connectivity structure in that case. It shows how these factors interact.
That's a perfect lead into axis 2, physical properties. Things like city size and how built up it is. Let's start with size.
Yes, city size, just the sheer area, is probably the single biggest predictor of non-native species richness. It's pretty consistent with the standard species-area relationship in ecology. Bigger area, more species.
More space, more niches, more opportunities.
Right. And the paper highlighted a really interesting historical angle, too.
Oh, based on when species arrived.
Exactly. They looked at 54 cities in Central Europe, Czech Republic, Poland, Germany. They split non-native plants into two groups.
Okay.
Neophytes, which arrived relatively recently, say after 1500 AD, and archaeophytes, which got there much earlier, often with agriculture, before 1500 AD.
The difference.
The number of neophytes went up significantly with city size, but the number of archaeophytes didn't really show that strong link.
Why not?
Well, the idea is that the archaeophytes represent a much smaller historical pool of species already adapted to human landscapes. The neophytes, that's this huge, constantly replenished pool pouring in through modern global trade, and they benefit massively from the scale and connections of big modern cities.
Fascinating. Okay, now for the level of urbanization, I think you mentioned an aha moment here. I'd assume the most paved-over concrete downtown core would be invasive central.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But often the highest proportion of non-native species isn't downtown, nor is it in the truly rural outskirts. It's somewhere in the middle.
The suburbs. Why there?
Well, this links directly to Axis 3, socioeconomics, particularly wealth. Often, these intermediate density areas, like suburbs, have higher average household wealth.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about the physical structure, but who lives there.
Exactly. They found this in Bengaluru, India, for instance. The highest non-native plant richness was in these mid-density housing areas, which also had the highest socioeconomic status.
And the connection is gardening.
Pretty much. More wealth often means bigger gardens, more spending on landscaping, buying imported ornamental plants.
Which means way more introductions, higher propagule pressure.
Precisely. Propagule pressure, the sheer number of individuals and species being introduced, and how often is massively boosted by these activities.
Which takes us nicely into Axis 3, culture and socioeconomics. You mentioned wealth, the luxury effect. How strong is that link?
It's often a really strong driver, especially for plants. Wealth, household income, these are consistently linked to higher non-native species richness. And interestingly, the correlation is often stronger for non-native species than for native ones.
So richer areas don't just have more plants, they specifically have more non-native plants.
Yes. And simulations they mentioned found that things like higher GDP per capita were key predictors of greater invasive spread potential globally. We're essentially funding biological homogenization through our landscaping choices.
But you said especially for plants. Does the luxury effect work differently for animals?
It can, yeah. It really depends on the pathway of introduction. Plants often come through the ornamental trade, which is tied to wealth, animals. It's more varied.
Right.
Well, in Santiago, Chile, they found common non-natives like pigeons and house sparrows were actually more abundant in lower-income neighborhoods, maybe linked to food scraps or different building structures.
Okay.
But the monk parakeet, another non-native there, was most abundant in the high-income areas. And that's likely because it arrived via the pet trade, escapes, deliberate releases, pathways more associated with wealth.
So the source matters. Where it came from dictates where it ends up thriving.
Absolutely. And another socioeconomic factor is simply time, city age.
Older cities have more invaders.
Seems like it. Older cities, older buildings, even older neighborhoods, they've just had more time for non-native species to arrive and establish. Colonization pressure builds up over centuries.
Any examples?
They mentioned a study across Chinese university campuses. The older the campus, the richer its non-native flora. And sometimes this ties back to history, like colonial practices where settlers intentionally brought species from home, a kind of historical legacy effect.
Right. Okay, let's shift to the final axis, Axis 4, biogeography and climate. This is traditional ecology territory. Latitude, temperature, rainfall. How much do these still matter in cities?
They definitely still matter. You generally see the expected patterns. Warmer tropical cities tend to have higher non-native diversity, following natural biodiversity gradients. Fewer non-native plants at higher elevations or latitudes in Europe, for example. That basic climate control is still there.
But there's a but, isn't there? The urbanization override.
Exactly. Cities can mess with the climate rules. They create their own microclimates, most famously the urban heat island effect.
Like a warm little bubble.
Kind of, yeah. And this bubble can act like a beachhead for non-native species. It can soften harsh conditions, allowing species to survive where they normally wouldn't outside their natural climate range.
Okay, give us a concrete example of this beachhead effect.
A good one is the invasive ant Tetramorium immigrans. In really cold climates, it can basically only survive in heavily urbanized areas. The city provides the warmth and shelter it needs to get through the winter.
It needs the city's thermal blanket.
That's a good way to put it. Another example is a non-native mud dauber wasp in northern Europe. It prefers urban areas where the climate would normally be too cold for it. The city makes it viable.
So cities definitely buffer the climate, allowing some species to expand their range. But does the paper say definitively that urbanization just completely tramples all over these large-scale biogeographic factors? More so than for native species.
That's where it gets tricky. The evidence on whether urbanization weakens the influence of large-scale biogeography more for non-native than native species is still, well, inconclusive.
Why is that so hard to figure out?
It's super complex. How do you separate the effect of the slightly warmer city climate from the fact that humans might just be constantly reintroducing that species over and over again? That relentless propagal pressure clouds the picture. It's hard to untangle those interacting forces.
Right, which leads us straight into the real-world problems. The paper calls managing urban invasions a wicked problem. Why that term specifically?
Because wicked problems are those messy, complex issues where you have conflicting values, incomplete knowledge, and no easy right answer. There are rarely simple win-win solutions.
Ecology, economics, social views, all clashing.
Exactly. You can't just say remove all non-natives because, frankly, it's often impossible, incredibly expensive, and sometimes people like the non-native species.
And there are trade-offs, right? Sometimes non-natives are actually providing useful functions in the city.
Absolutely critical point. Managers face these tough balancing acts. Do you try to eradicate a non-native tree that provides shade and cooling, or maybe even food for native animals? They mentioned a case in Brazil where non-native trees were actually recommended to help support native marmosets.
Wow. So it becomes a conflict of values.
Definitely. Whose values get prioritized? The aesthetic value some people find in a non-native flowering tree versus the conservation value of promoting native species. It requires really transparent discussion involving everyone affected.
Okay, so huge challenges. Before we wrap up, did the paper point out major gaps in our current knowledge? Where does the research need to go?
Yeah, a couple of big ones. First, bias. Historically, the research is heavily skewed.
How so?
Geographically, it's mostly focused on North America and Western Europe. We know far less about urban invasions in large parts of Asia, Africa, South America. And taxonomically, it's mostly about plants and birds, insects, microbes, other groups, much less studied. So our global picture is actually quite patchy.
And measurement inconsistencies.
That too. Different studies measure things differently, like connectivity. Sometimes it's just simple map distance, but maybe measures like actual shipping volume or air traffic would be much better indicators of how species are really moving between cities via human activity.
We need more standardized, systematic data collection globally.
Exactly. We need to really get a handle on the dynamics between cities and their surroundings, maybe using ideas from metapopulation ecology to figure out just how much urbanization is truly reshaping these global patterns.
So let's bring it all together. What's the big takeaway for you, the listener, trying to make sense of your own urban environment? It seems clear that cities are fundamentally changing the rules of the game.
They really are. Urbanization is breaking down old barriers, geographic distance, climate zones, and human factors, especially global connections and local wealth, are often proving stronger than the natural ecological processes we used to think were paramount.
And given how widespread these invasions are, and that, as you said, people often value these non-native species for shade, beauty, whatever, the paper hints we might just have to accept some of them.
It suggests that, yeah, for many species, eradication is probably off the table. They're established, they're part of the functioning urban ecosystem now. For better or worse, we might have to accept them as permanent residents in many city landscapes.
Which leaves us with a really challenging final thought. If this biological homogenization is happening, maybe even accelerating, and the lines between native and non-native are getting blurrier and blurrier in cities, well, what should urban conservation even aim for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? In this constantly changing human-dominated urban world, how do we define success? What ecological functions or species or communities should we actually be prioritizing and trying to protect going forward? It forces us to rethink what conservation means in the Anthropocene city.